when my father passed on at the end of 2011, I did my best to carry on as normal, to keep it together, and just to act as though nothing had happened. And this was a time when I felt very shut down, very weighed down, and I didn't understand the grieving process. So it was then not that I needed to take a step back and to grieve. It was just a case of business as usual. And although I didn't grieve at this time, and I was out of touch with a lot of the pain I was in, around 2 years later, I ended up coming into contact with this pain and a lot of other pain. And this was after a relationship came to an end. And this is when I was basically overwhelmed with pain. It's like I was trying to keep my head above water because of how intense it was. And after reaching out for external support and working with different people over a period of 2 years, I started to work through some of the pain. But it wasn't until around 4 years later that I started to really get into this pain and to cry it out. And at the beginning of 2015, when I was working with a therapist, the guy said to me, "Why don't you see if you can cry in your own company?" And this is because I found it hard at the time to cry around others. And after he made this suggestion, I ended up going down to the cemetery where my father is buried. And I started to think about him and the different memories that I have with him. And when this happened, all this pain started to come up in a big way. I'd already done some crying by myself, but this wasn't something I did on a consistent basis. So when I got into this pain at the cemetery, it was like a volcano had erupted and it all started to come out. And that was the beginning of what would take place for a number of years. Before my father passed on, he went into hospital to have an operation. And although he was older, and so there was a greater risk that something would go wrong, I still believed that he would come out soon enough. So when I dropped him off at the hospital, it was pretty normal, because he'd often been going to the hospital anyway and to having appointments, so it was quite normal. And he ended up not coming out of the hospital. So while he was moved to different ones as things got more serious, and then towards the end to be closer to me and my family. And I think it was the day before he passed on that I had this reading with a tarot reader, and he said, when you see him tomorrow, say goodbye and thank him because that'll be the last time you'll see him. And he was right. But although he said this to me, I wasn't able to say goodbye, because it didn't seem real. It didn't seem as though that would be it. And I remember leaving the hospital and going back out and going back in because I needed a toilet. But I can find it. I can find it in me to go up there and to say goodbye. And for years after, I felt guilty and as though I lacked courage, and I was quite hard on myself. And when I worked with a healer in 2018, he said to me that what happened was destined to take place. And this was because I didn't have a strong emotional connection with my father. He wasn't really available. As a family, we weren't really close emotionally. So because of that, this was destined to happen. And he said that it wasn't just up to me to say goodbye, it was also up to my father to play his part. So hearing this and taking into account that what he was saying was true, it made it a lot easier for me to come to terms with what took place. But of course that doesn't mean that I don't often think about that moment in my life. When I first started to cry on a consistent basis in 2015, I didn't understand the grieving process, and so I ended up looking for answers. I needed to know what I could do to feel better and to come to terms with what took place. And this was when I came across a book called Understanding Your Grief by Alan D. Wolfelt. And this is a great book. It really shone the light on the grieving process. And I ended up reading articles and finding out more about this process in other books. And what I also came to see is that I wasn't just grieving the loss of my father. I was also grieving the loss of the needs that were not met and that would never be met now that he was gone. I was grieving needs that went back to when I was very, very small. A time in my life when, because my father wasn't really emotionally available, these needs were not met. So it was then not just me grieving as an adult, there's also the needs that my inner child was grieving, was having to come to terms with the fact that these needs were never going to be met. So with that said, if you have experienced the loss of your father or someone else in your life, please understand that it does get easier. It's been said that we never get over the loss of someone, and I would agree with this. We don't. We can't. They will always be there. I'm thinking about what was lost. It will always be hard. But it doesn't mean that we can't embrace life once again. Because as I see it, I'm sure my father wouldn't want me to stay stuck and to be unable to live a life worth living. I'm sure he wouldn't want me to be in pain and to suffer forever. And I'm sure that the person who you've lost would want the same for you. So there is a way to move forward. Doesn't mean forgetting. Doesn't mean casting them aside. But there is a way.